In the summer of 1968, inside a rented gymnasium on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. 340 folding chairs were arranged in a horseshoe around a 40 by 40-foot canvas floor. The occasion was an invitational martial arts exhibition hosted by Jun Rhee, the man who had brought Taekwondo to the United States. The attendees were not casual observers. They were tournament fighters, dojo owners, combat instructors, retired military hand-to-hand specialists, and 3 staff writers from Black Belt magazine who had driven from Los Angeles to cover the event. The air conditioning had failed at noon and had not been repaired. A single industrial fan had been placed in the northeast corner of the room, and had moved the hot air from one side to the other without cooling it. By 2 in the afternoon, the temperature inside that gymnasium was 97 degrees. The canvas floor was damp at its edges where humidity had settled. Nobody left. In this particular community, leaving an exhibition early was an admission that you did not understand what you were watching. Seated in the 3rd row, on the left side in a plain black t-shirt and dark cotton trousers, was a man who weighed 137 pounds. He had arrived without an entourage. He had driven himself. He carried no equipment bag, no mouthguard, no hand wraps. He sat with one ankle crossed over the opposite knee and his arms folded, and he watched the demonstrations with the specific attention of a man who sees structure where others see movement. His name was not listed on the program. He had been invited by Rhee as a personal guest, and the printed card on his chair read only reserved. His name was Bruce Lee. On the canvas floor at that moment stood a man of considerably different proportion. 28 years old, 5 feet 10 inches, 172 pounds, with forearms built from 14 years of competitive karate and a neck thickened by 600 daily sit-ups performed with a 25-pound plate held behind his head. He had won the professional middleweight karate championship 3 consecutive years. His tournament record across 1967 and 1968 stood at 43 wins against a single loss, and that single loss had been reversed on appeal. He had trained under Fumio Demura in Okinawan weapons and under Munyong Lee in Tang Sudo. He was, by any objective measure available in the American martial arts community at that time, the most dominant competitive fighter on the continental circuit. His name was Chuck Norris, and in the next 11 seconds, with 4 movements, 2 of which were never completed, everything that Chuck Norris believed about fighting, about rank, about certainty, and about what a 137-pound man could do to him at close range was going to be quietly, permanently disassembled. Not a single person in that gymnasium, including Chuck Norris himself, understood that what they were about to witness would become the most retold encounter in the oral history of American martial arts. The 2 men who stood at the center of it would not speak of it publicly for more than 30 years. The exhibition had been running for 2 hours before the moment arrived. 6 demonstrators had taken the floor before Chuck Norris, including a 3rd-degree black belt in Shotokan who broke 4 stacked boards with a single palm strike, and a Korean weapons specialist who performed a bow staff routine with the kind of mechanical precision that earns applause but not silence. Applause means admiration. Silence means fear. The room had applauded each of the 6 demonstrators politely and moved on. Chuck Norris took the floor at 1:20. He gave a demonstration of spinning heel kicks, working through 9 variations at increasing speed against a padded striking post held by 2 assistants. The post had to be replaced after the 6th variation. The room noticed this. A spinning heel kick delivered by a man of Norris's hip torque does not merely strike a target. It reorganizes the target. Several men in the front row had shifted their chairs back an additional 6 inches during his routine, not from instruction but from instinct. When the demonstration ended, Norris received a standing ovation from roughly half the room. He bowed once and stepped off the canvas and moved toward the folding table where Jun Rhee and 2 other senior instructors were seated. He picked up a white towel and pressed it against the back of his neck. He drank water from a paper cup. He was breathing evenly. He had not exerted himself. What the audience had watched was control, not effort. And the difference between those 2 things is the difference between a technician and a weapon. It was at this point that a conversation began at the folding table. The details of what was said have been recounted differently by 4 of the 6 people who were within earshot. What is agreed upon is this. The conversation turned to a question that had been circulating through the American martial arts community for the better part of a year. The question was about Bruce Lee. Specifically about whether Bruce Lee's art, which had no formalized kata, no belt ranking, no tournament pedigree, and no competitive record, could be considered a legitimate fighting system or whether it was something closer to choreography dressed in philosophy. Norris did not start the conversation, but he entered it. And once he entered it, he did not moderate his position, because Chuck Norris at 28 years old did not moderate positions. He held them. He held them the way he held stances, with the full weight of his body behind them and the absolute conviction that they would not be moved. He set down his paper cup. He turned his body so that he was facing the gymnasium floor, facing the third row, facing the chair where Bruce Lee was sitting with his arms still folded. The distance between the folding table and that chair was roughly 40 feet. It was not a private conversation. It was a public declaration made in the direction of the man it concerned, and in a voice that carried clearly across the silence between demonstrations. Chuck Norris said a sentence that several witnesses would later reconstruct from memory with minor variations but identical meaning. He said that he respected Bruce Lee's physical conditioning. He said that Lee's speed was impressive in a controlled setting. And then he said the sentence that would become the title of this story, and the hinge upon which the next 11 seconds would turn. He said, but if we are being honest, what he does would not survive 60 seconds of actual contact against a trained fighter. The gymnasium did not erupt. It did not gasp. It did something worse. It went quiet with the particular silence of 340 people who have just heard a claim they know will be tested, because the man it was made about is sitting 40 feet away and has almost certainly heard every word. Bruce Lee had heard every word. If you want to see what happened next, make sure you are subscribed and leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. This is the kind of story that does not get told on television. It gets told here. For 4 seconds, nothing happened. Bruce Lee did not move. He did not unfold his arms. He did not look at Norris. He looked at the canvas floor with the expression of a man considering a minor arithmetic problem. Then he uncrossed his ankle. He stood. He removed his wristwatch, a steel Seiko with a black face, and placed it on the seat of his folding chair. He did not hurry. He rolled the cuffs of his cotton trousers twice, evenly, and set each fold with a press of his thumb. He unbuttoned the top button of his black t-shirt, then seemed to decide against removing it entirely and left it as it was. The crowd did not recognize him immediately. The first row turned. Then a current of recognition moved through the second row and across the third like voltage traveling through a wire. A murmur that was not words but the sound of chairs shifting as 340 people adjusted to a new understanding of what was about to happen. A writer from Black Belt magazine named Jim Coleman set his notepad on his knee and stopped writing. He would later say that he stopped because he knew that whatever was about to occur would not need notes. It would not leave him. Bruce Lee stepped onto the canvas in bare feet. He walked to the center of the floor and stopped 12 feet from Chuck Norris. He did not bow. He did not assume a stance. He stood with his hands at his sides, his weight distributed evenly across both feet, his chin level. And every man in that room who understood fighting understood the same thing at the same time. He had already decided what was going to happen. It had already ended. Chuck Norris simply did not know it yet. What followed lasted 11 seconds. In competition, 11 seconds is a negligible interval. A referee would not have completed his initial instructions. A timekeeper's hand would still be on the bell. But 11 seconds in front of 340 trained martial artists inside a gymnasium where the air does not move is a different kind of 11 seconds. It is a negotiation conducted in distance and trajectory and the space between what a man intends and what a man is permitted to do. Second one, Chuck Norris shifted his weight to his back foot and rotated his lead hip forward, loading the spinning heel kick that had destroyed a padded post 20 minutes earlier. His right foot left the canvas. The rotation was flawless. The arc of the kick traced a line at the precise height of Bruce Lee's left temple, 67 inches from the ground. with enough force behind it to fracture the zygomatic bone and end the conversation permanently. It did not arrive. Bruce Lee moved his head 4 inches to the right. The kick passed through the space where his face had been and continued through its arc, and because a spinning heel kick is a committed technique, Chuck Norris's back was turned to Bruce Lee for approximately 0.3 of a second as he completed the rotation. Lee did not strike during this window. He waited. He let Norris return to a facing position and reset. Jun Rhee, seated at the folding tables 7 feet from the edge of the canvas, placed both hands flat on the surface and did not lift them again for the remainder of the encounter. His cup of water sat untouched beside his right hand. A drop of condensation ran down its side and pooled on the table. Jim Coleman's pen was on the floor. He did not notice when it fell. He would not find it until 40 minutes later, wedged beneath his chair, and he would keep it in a desk drawer for the next 19 years as a kind of artifact from a moment his hands had decided was more important than his profession. A stunt coordinator named Gene LaBelle, who had been leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, pushed himself upright and took 1 step forward. A judo champion in his own right, a man who had fought professional wrestlers and choked out trained boxers, LaBelle recognized something in the geometry of what was unfolding that his body understood before his mind could name it. Second 4. Norris adjusted. He abandoned the spinning technique and threw a rear cross aimed at the solar plexus, followed immediately by a hooking kick to the outside of the lead leg. This was combination fighting, the kind of pressure that had earned him 43 tournament victories, layered strikes designed to crowd an opponent's reaction time and force a defensive error. Bruce Lee did not block the cross. He did not parry the kick. He slipped both. The cross passed beneath his chin as he shifted his centerline backward by the width of a closed fist. The hook kick swept past his lead shin as he lifted his foot less than 2 inches off the canvas and replaced it in the same position. He had not retreated. He had not advanced. He had made himself absent from 2 attacks and present in the same square foot of space. And the economy of the movement was so precise that a man watching from the back row would not have known that punches had been thrown. A fight is not what most people believe it to be. Most people believe a fight is 2 men striking each other until 1 man falls. It is not. A fight is a conversation about distance. Every technique that has ever been invented in any martial art in any country across any century is, at its foundation, a method of closing distance or a method of maintaining it. The man who controls the distance controls the conversation. The man who controls the conversation has already decided whether the other man will be heard at all. Chuck Norris was trying to close distance with speed and power and volume. Bruce Lee was maintaining distance with precision and angle and economy. One man was shouting, the other was whispering. And in a quiet room, a whisper always reaches further. Bruce Lee did not fight Chuck Norris at the center of that gymnasium. He conducted a lesson in geometry. And he conducted it with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world because he knew exactly how much time he would need. Second 7. Norris threw the third and final combination. A lead jab to draw the guard high, a reverse punch aimed at the floating rib, and the beginning of a rear leg roundhouse that would have carried every pound of his 172-pound frame into the soft tissue below Bruce Lee's left arm. The jab was slipped. The reverse punch met air. The roundhouse never completed its arc. Bruce Lee was no longer in front of him. He was beside him. The transition had taken less time than the blink of a human eye. Lee had entered on an angle that existed between 2 of Norris's committed strikes, a corridor so narrow that the geometry of it should not have allowed a human body to pass. And yet, he had passed through it the way water passes through a gap in a wall, without force, without collision, simply by being shaped correctly at the correct instant. Second 9. Lee's right hand rose from his hip in a straight line toward the hinge of Norris's jaw. It was not a punch in any traditional sense. It had no wind-up, no rotation, no telegraph. It moved from origin to destination as though the intervening distance did not exist. The fist stopped 1 inch from the point of contact. 1 inch. Close enough for Norris to feel the displaced air against his skin. close enough for the fine hairs along his jawline to register pressure that was not yet impact. Lee held it there. Second 11. The gymnasium did not applaud. It did not cheer. It produced the specific quality of silence that occurs when 340 people simultaneously understand that they have watched something they will not be able to fully explain to anyone who was not present. Bruce Lee lowered his hand. He opened it. He extended it, palm upward, toward Chuck Norris. Norris looked at the open hand. His chest was rising and falling with the breathing pattern of a man whose body has been saturated with adrenaline that had no target. His 3 best combinations, refined across 14 years of training and 43 competitive victories, had failed to make contact with a man who weighed 35 pounds less than he did and who had not thrown a single offensive technique until the last possible second. The strike had been stopped 1 inch short. And both men knew what that inch meant. It meant that what had just occurred was not a fight. It was a choice. Bruce Lee had chosen to demonstrate a conclusion without imposing it. The difference between those 2 actions is the distance between dominance and cruelty, and Bruce Lee had placed himself on the correct side of that distance with a precision that matched everything else he had done on that canvas. Lee leaned forward. He spoke a sentence into Chuck Norris's ear that no microphone recorded and no bystander overheard. The content of that sentence would not be disclosed for 34 years, and when it was finally repeated, it was by Chuck Norris himself, in a voice that had aged and softened and carried the weight of a man who had thought about 12 words every day for more than 3 decades. But that comes later. Chuck Norris stood at the center of that gymnasium and faced a choice that defines every man who has ever been shown the boundary of his own ability by someone who did not need to embarrass him to prove the point. He could make an excuse, he could cite the heat, he could question the format, he could suggest that a tournament setting with rules and a referee would produce a different result. These are the ordinary shelters of a man whose certainty has been removed in public. He did not reach for any of them. Chuck Norris took Bruce Lee's extended hand. He gripped it. He bowed his head once, briefly, and said 2 words that were heard by the entire front row. "Thank you." Jean LaBelle, who had taken 3 steps forward from the wall and now stood at the edge of the canvas with his hands in his jacket pockets, removed his right hand and placed it on Bruce Lee's shoulder as Lee stepped off the floor. He held it there for 2 seconds without saying anything. It was the kind of contact a man makes to confirm that what he has just watched was performed by a physical person and not by something his memory has already begun to edit. The story left that gymnasium within the hour. It left in the mouths of men who walked to their cars in the parking lot and sat behind their steering wheels for a long time before turning the key. It left in telephone calls made from motel rooms that evening, calls that began without greeting, calls that opened with a sentence and a question. The sentence was a description. The question was always the same: were you there? By nightfall, the story had reached 4 dojos in the D.C. metropolitan area. By the end of the week, it had crossed the country in long-distance calls between instructors who had trained together, competed against each other, and shared the particular bond of men who have been hit in the face often enough to respect anyone who can avoid being hit at all. And as the story traveled, it changed. The way all stories change when they pass through the hands of men who were not present and who need the narrative to serve a purpose their own experience cannot provide. In one version, Lee threw 7 strikes and Norris blocked 6 of them. This did not happen. In another, Norris charged Lee from across the gymnasium and was thrown to the ground. This did not happen either. In a third version, popular for a time in West Coast dojos that had no affiliation with either man, the encounter lasted 4 minutes and ended with both men bowing simultaneously. This version is the most elegant and the least true. The encounter lasted 11 seconds. Bruce Lee threw 1 technique. It stopped 1 inch short. Everything else is invention layered upon a silence that 340 people carried out of a gymnasium and into a lifetime of reinterpretation. What is true and what can be verified by the parallel accounts of Jim Coleman, Jean LaBelle, and June Rhee himself is what happened in the weeks and months and years after that afternoon. Chuck Norris sought out Bruce Lee. He did not call ahead. He did not send word through June Rhee or through any intermediary. He found Bruce Lee's address, and he drove to it. He knocked on the door, and when Bruce Lee opened it, Chuck Norris said that he had come to learn. Not to train, not to spar, to learn. The distinction mattered. Training refines what a man already knows. Learning requires a man to admit that what he knows is incomplete. Chuck Norris stood on Bruce Lee's doorstep and made that admission without pride and without shame. Within 3 months of the exhibition, Norris had begun training with Lee privately, twice a week at Lee's home in Bel Air, in a backyard where the sessions began at 6 a.m. and ended when Lee decided they ended. Norris later said that in those sessions he unlearned more than he had learned in the previous decade. He said that Lee dismantled his fighting the way a watchmaker dismantles a watch, component by component, and then rebuilt it without the parts that did not contribute to function. It was Lee who introduced Norris to the idea that martial arts is not a collection of techniques but a process of individual expression. It was Lee who told Norris that competition had made him precise but rigid, and that rigidity, in the end, is just a more disciplined form of fragility. And it was Lee who, in 1972, cast Chuck Norris as his opponent in the film that would become the single most iconic martial arts fight ever committed to celluloid, the Coliseum scene in Way of the Dragon. Lee cast Norris not because he was a good actor. He cast him because he knew that Norris understood, from a personal and physical experience, what it meant to face someone who operated on a level you did not yet know existed. The performance required truth. Norris had the truth. He had earned it in 11 seconds on a canvas floor in a rented gymnasium in Washington, D.C. Bruce Lee died on July 20, 1973. He was 32 years old. The world received the news and understood it as the loss of a movie star, a cultural icon, a man who had changed how the West saw the East. Chuck Norris received the news and understood it as something else entirely. He understood it as the loss of the man who had shown him the width of the distance he had not yet crossed, and who had then stood on the other side of that distance and waited for him with patience and without judgment. In the decades that followed, Chuck Norris built a career that spanned competitive fighting, film, television, and philanthropy. He became one of the most recognized martial artists on the planet. He trained with the best. He fought the best. He won championships that most men cannot dream of entering. And every interview in which he was asked to name the greatest martial artist he had ever encountered ended the same way. He said the name Bruce Lee. He said it without hesitation. He said it without qualification. And then, in an interview recorded in 2002, 34 years after the afternoon in that gymnasium, a reporter pressed him for more. The reporter asked what Bruce Lee had said to him that day. The sentence whispered into his ear on the canvas floor while 340 people watched in silence. Chuck Norris paused. He looked at the table in front of him. He said that Bruce Lee had leaned in and spoken 12 words, and that those 12 words had changed the entire trajectory of his life. Bruce Lee had said, "You are better than you know. Come find me and I will show you." Norris said those 12 words quietly, the way a man repeats a sentence he has carried for a long time, a sentence that has worn smooth inside him like a stone held in a closed hand for 34 years. There is a lesson in this story, and it is not the lesson most people expect. The lesson is not that Bruce Lee was faster. He was. The lesson is not that size and credentials are irrelevant. They are not irrelevant. Chuck Norris was a genuine and formidable fighter, and the story only matters because he was. The lesson is that the distance between what a man believes he can do and what he has not yet been shown is the most important distance in his life. It is wider than any stance. It is deeper than any training. And the only way to close it is to stand in front of someone who has already crossed it and to have the honesty to say 2 words. Thank you. That is what Chuck Norris said on a canvas floor in a gymnasium in 1968. And those 2 words opened a door that led to everything that came after. The story a man tells about his own ability and what he discovers when he meets the person who reveals its true shape are 2 different things. The first story is comfortable. The second story is useful. Chuck Norris chose the useful one. And that choice, made in 11 seconds in front of 340 witnesses, is the reason we are still telling his story today. Next week we will cover the day a 6'5" Navy SEAL instructor told Chuck Norris that his black belt was a costume and his dojo was a daycare. What happened in that hallway in Coronado, California has never been told in full. Until now.